And yeah, here's my talk on what does design thinking have to do with inclusion. So it's a question that I'm asking myself and honestly had never really given a lot of thought to until a few months ago. And that was right when the protests in Minnesota were starting over the killing of George Floyd. And right when that happened, our Cisco leadership kind of told us, this is an important thing, and if you need to take a moment to pause, then you should, but also let us know that we need to start having conversations about social injustice and things that needed to be made better. So one of the, it was kind of a good thing that they said, oh, and Cisco Live was supposed to start that week. It's Cisco's biggest live event of the year. And the day before it was meant to start, our CEO, Chuck Robbins, got up and said, we know that may not be the time to have this big celebration of Cisco technology, and that we would be rescheduling it. So in that interim time in my group, we got together to check in on each other, to care for each other, to process what we needed to process. And I think it was a time of all of us kind of, or a lot of us, definitely me, asking ourselves questions of what really does this mean to me, and what do I need to understand what's going on, and also for myself, to do better. There was a little bit talk, because I'm in a design transformation team, of, well, what can we do? But that was immediately quieted down because it was more time for us to be learning and listening than to jump out and do anything. And for me especially, because, so this is what we do in the design transformation team. A lot of it is supporting design thinking within our organization. And one of the things I do is I collect critiques of design thinking. And things that I've seen through the years as I've been collecting stories are articles like this. Design thinking is fundamentally conservative and preserves the status quo, in Harvard Business Review. And in Fast Company, this headline of, want to fight inequality? Forget design thinking. So I kind of had this sense of, all right, this is not the time to jump in with design thinking. And in those initial days, also, well, I was following other designers on Twitter and actually looking for new designer activists and organizers to see what they were doing and taking hints from them. And one of the things, well, I didn't really save the tweet, but there was one tweet that really kind of caught my eye. And I can't find it again, but it said something like, you can't, how might we police brutality? And oof, direct shot at design thinkers, kind of letting us know, you're part of the problem. So, oops. So just having a little PowerPoint issue here. So that went on. for a while, and I was mostly just thinking about these issues and dealing with them as a private person. And one more thing you should know about my background in this is that when it comes to work, I've never actually wanted to work on diversity and inclusion efforts. And this is something I actually, let my boss know, because our group does sometimes run sessions about that or work on those things. And I said, that makes me uncomfortable. This is, not a thing I want to be working on. And then a couple of weeks passed and Cisco Live went on. And at Cisco Live, our CEO announced Cisco's new purpose. And this is something he said they'd been working on for months. And he said, our purpose is to power an inclusive future. Wow. And in fact, in his blog post, he went on to say that it was partly about, our own reckoning with deep-rooted systemic racism and bigotry have brought to light centuries of inequality, injustice, and fragility underpinning our society for far too long. And when he said that, because I had been thinking so much about the things that I needed to do to make our world better, is for the first time, I thought, yeah, you know what? I've been separating this from my professional life, but maybe, no, it wasn't even a maybe. It was like, I would like to actually make this part of my work. So this is what my talk is actually about. I wanted to start changing my work and changing my everyday practices to align with Cisco's purpose to power an inclusive future. So this is kind of what my talk is about. It's me trying to figure out what that means, some ways I've been thinking about it, and the sort of journey that I've had to go through internally to start working on this. So I have to admit that when I started thinking about this, I really didn't know what it meant for me. In fact, it's partly because my job is not really to design. My job is to be an expert on the design process, to coach teams in how to use design methods or creative methods to solve their problems and meet their challenges. And it's not even like they're working on challenges that have to do with developing new products and services for which there is, an end user that we know about. Sometimes they're internal processes. So what does it mean for me to be working towards inclusion? I'm not in the leadership who's thinking about who do we hire, how do we have more diverse hires and retaining diverse hires. I'm not, there's other things going on at Cisco. So one of my colleagues who's a content writer, is working on a project for removing biased language from our technical documentation. So, for those not familiar with, I work in Cisco security, and some of the technical, terms that we use are things like whitelist and blacklist. So we were going to go through. So that's like a very specific targeted thing that they could work on. But what did that mean for me? Well, being that I am, from an academic background, I started researching, looking for, okay, so what are these design methodologies that I should start incorporating into my work that I can start bringing into these teams so that we can be more inclusive somehow, or our work is no longer contributing to inequality in the world. And so I, did kind of what a lot of you may be doing, attending webinars, reading books and reading articles. And I learned about, there are a bunch of groups that have come up with methodologies for this. There's Design for Diversity from Project Inkblot and Equity Centered Design from the Creative Reaction Lab. There's, the book Design Justice from Sasha Costanza Chalk. There's, and I got this really cool set of flashcards that's critical theory for designers. And I'm taking in this information and trying to push it into the work that I do, and just kind of coming up flat, because a lot of the examples I'm looking at, they're methodologies that were developed because these designers were looking at community impact problems. They were trying to solve problems that are of social impact. And they had identified that the problem with design thinking in doing those kinds of projects is that if we use design thinking, it tends to be, design, sort of design thinking came from a consultancy, background, of this group of designers dropping into some community, developing empathy kinds of tools, coming up with their own framework for understanding the problems, developing solutions, maybe bringing the community in to validate solutions. But it was just people with more privilege and power going in often into communities of people who have been decentered or pushed aside and saying, we have great ideas. Great. So I kind of understood some of the principles of where their theories of being more inclusive or more equitable in design came from. But I had a hard time figuring out, how did this relate to me? I work in this big tech company. We produce enterprise products and solutions. When we talk about our users, we refer to them pretty much by the names of their roles, like, network admin and, the security operations center engineer and security analysts. So how does that relate to what I'm doing? And how am I picking out, where are these marginalized communities I need to be concerned with? And I just kind of, being the person I am, wanting to do more research, I was kind of digging in more into just terms and getting more confused, thinking about positionality and balance of power, and feeling stuck. And then I realized, I'm getting all tied up in this, not because I can't figure out what the theory is, and not because I'm not able to develop new design methodologies, but partly because I couldn't get over that one tweet that I saw about, you can't, how might we police brutality? And actually other things that I saw about how design thinking is part of the problem. And really that was stopping me, being afraid of making the steps, feeling like I wanted to figure out how to apply this to my work. And I wanted to know not only how to do it, but how it was gonna benefit. What if I tried asking some of these questions when asked in more equity-centered design, like, who are we marginalizing? Who are we excluding? I didn't really have an answer. I didn't know how that would work. So what I had to do was kind of stop and deal with the fact that it was really uncomfortable, that it wasn't going to feel good, that I, just by reading and thinking really hard about it, was not going to come up with what I needed to do. So I just figured I'm going to take some tiny steps for my day-to-day work that I do. And through those tiny steps, just delve a little deeper into what inclusion means when I do my day-to-day work. And also, I thought if I can take these little steps, then I can find out from other people. Like I'm not going to figure out what this really means by thinking hard about it and then bringing it to my next project. It's because I'm going to start talking about it, and somebody who's more knowledgeable than me is going to point out to me, this is why it matters and where. So I'm actually going to share with you some of the steps that I'm thinking of. I don't have slides for this because this is not my area. I'm just learning, and I'm, definitely not an expert. But just to give you a flavor for like what I mean when I say the little steps that I wanted to take. So the little steps I'm thinking are, one is, well, not even going to the theory so much, but something I actually already knew about from studying with Indy Young, who often talks about the way that we write personas. And sometimes we write personas with include demographics that are really irrelevant to thinking about the behavior of those personas. And the behavior is what we need to understand in order to serve those users well and design well for them. So yeah, so one little step would be, next time I'm working with a team that's building personas, I can ask them, what details are you including there that are just demographics that don't really explain? And the harm of using those demographics is just that we tend to start projecting our own idea of what does it mean to be, say, a 13-year-old girl who wants to use a photography app, instead of really understanding the behavior of that user. The second thing is, maybe next time, or actually I'm thinking about this now for my projects, when I go to them, I can ask, well, when we're thinking about who our users are, who are we including in our users and who are we excluding? And it's not that there's anything wrong with excluding, right? We need to figure out who exactly we want to serve and who we can serve well. But we should be more cognizant of why we're excluding some people, and also just wonder at all if other people getting excluded. Another question, and this also comes, from any of those frameworks that I saw, is just asking what harm could come if we put this solution out in the world. And I really like this one because my background is actually, for a while I was like a risk analysis engineer, and for complex systems like spacecraft and vehicles, we would have to go through a hazard analysis. And finally, one other thing I wanted to bring into my work was, thinking more about my position and my background and how that relates to the project and how I might approach the project. And the simplest example I can think of this is, part of my job is to be facilitating workshops. And when I facilitate workshops, obviously part of my job is to make sure that everybody gets heard equally, make sure everybody has a voice. And we know that's something that we need to do, but maybe I can stop and think ahead of time. How do I relate to this project, and whose voices might I tend to amplify because I feel like they are going to be the ones who are experts? Who might I forget to amplify because subconsciously I'm going to be thinking they'll have less to say? So those are just the little examples of steps I'm taking. And I wanted to, say again that I'm not telling you this because I think I have the right answers. And I know a great way to get started. I'm saying them because I know that I'm not going to be able to change my mindset in order to change my practice. without connecting with the community and being able to talk to you about the work that I'm doing, so that maybe one of you can give me feedback and point me in the right direction. So the thing I wanted to share with you is, from my experience, you know, some of us didn't start out as activists and organizers, and we're just trying to figure this out and learn and make our tiny steps. So it's going to be uncomfortable. You know, take those tiny steps because it's by applying it to your actual work that you're going to learn. I'd say we're going to make missteps, so trust in your ability to be gracious when that happens. And let's figure this out together. So what does design thinking have to do with inclusion? We're going to figure this out together. Thanks.